안녕하십니까. 저는 한국할랄산업연구원의 노장서 원장입니다. 저희 연구원은 식품의약품안전처의 위탁을 받아서 2021년도 할랄 화장품 인증 지원 사업을 수행하고 있습니다. 본 사업은 할랄 화장품 교육 사업과 해외 전문가 초청 세미나 사업으로 구성되어 있습니다. 해외 전문가 초청 세미나는 최근 팬데믹 상황을 반영해서 웨비나 형태로 진행이 됩니다. 올해 해외 전문가 초청 세미나는 인도네시아, 말레이시아, 중동의 전문가를 모시고 진행을 하고 있습니다. 이 시간은 아랍에미리트와 사우디아라비아가 속하는 걸프 지역의 전문가를 모시고 이 지역의 어떤 할랄 화장품 시장의 동향에 대해서 한번 알아보고자 합니다. 발표해 주실 분은 두바이에서 발간되는 권위 있는 이슬람경제 보고서죠. State of the Islamic Economy Report를 발간하고 있는 다이나 스탠다드의 홀 코크레인 연구원이십니다. 홀 코크레인 연구원은 동보고서의 화장품과 의약품 분야를 담당을 하고 있고요. 지난 20년 동안 중동과 아프리카 지역의 경제와 비즈니스 이슈를 전문적으로 다뤄온 저널리스트이시기도 합니다. 걸프 지역은 아랍에미리트를 중심으로 한국 화장품에 대한 수요가 급증하고 있는 곳입니다. 2020년도를 기준으로 보게 되면 아랍에미리트에 대한 수출은 전년 대비 63%가 증가한 2,300만 달러를 기록을 했고요. 사우디아라비아에 대한 수출은 전년 대비 무려 90%가 증가해서 약 2천만 달러의 수출을 기록을 했습니다. 이 지역의 국산 화장품 수출 급등에 따라서 국내 기업들의 관심도 커지고 있고요. 바로 오늘 웨비나를 기회로 해서 우리가 걸프 지역의 할랄 화장품 시장 동향을 살펴보고자 합니다. 발표는 일단 전체적으로 이슬람 시장 전체적인 어떤 상황, 그리고 또 좀 더 압축을 해가지고 할랄 화장품 시장의 어떤 전체적인 규모, 상황, 이렇게 이제 말씀을 드리고 좀 각을 좁혀서 나중에는 아랍에미리트 시장을 좀 포커스를 둬가지고 그 지역의 어떤 현재 상황을 발표하는 그런 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 발표가 끝나면 제가 몇 가지 질문과 함께 대담을 나누도록 하겠습니다. Mr. Cochrane, I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to meet you through this webinar. Thank you for accepting our invitation to today's webinar. Last year, export of Korean cosmetics to Gulf countries increased very significantly. For example, export of Korean cosmetics to Saudi Arabia increased by 90% to $20 million US. However, many cosmetic players in Korea are not familiar with the cosmetic market in the Gulf region. That's why we have invited you, an expert in the cosmetic market in the Gulf region. So now, would you please share your slides and start the presentation from now on?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you. A pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, morning where I am. Maybe we could just show the first slide. I'm a senior associate with Dinar Standard and a journalist, and I've been covering business and finance in the Middle East for about 20 years. Dinar Standard is an Islamic economy consultancy based in Dubai and New York. Before focusing on the Gulf cosmetics market, I want to just give a quick overview of the global Islamic economy. Some of these figures are slightly changed. There's actually around 1.9 billion Muslims in the world today. And Muslim spending power is estimated around $2.1 trillion. Now, this is just important to note, this is not just for halal products. This is Muslim spending on everything. But we define the Islamic economy as 6 core segments, which is Islamic finance, halal food, halal cosmetics, halal pharmaceuticals, modest fashion, and Islamic themed media. It's important to note all of those too, because there is quite a lot of interconnectivity in certain areas, particularly when we look at ingredients, for instance, crossover there between halal pharmaceuticals, halal food, and of course halal cosmetics, and also with modest fashion. As in the conventional fashion world, there is crossover with the modest fashion also being the influencers on social media and ways for marketing and using those tools. Okay, and the next slide. So as you see, this is the population growth and projections, and there's growing demand for halal products in the Muslim world. but particularly being driven actually by Muslims in the West and millennials, and that's spilling over into other Muslim majority markets, with a lot of growth in the Middle East, but also particularly in Southeast Asia and Asia in general. Dinar Standard brings out the State of the Global Islamic Economy report, and that's the next one's going to be released in November. This will have a lot of the latest estimates and statistics, as well as developments within the halal sectors over the last year and where things are going forward. It's obviously been a challenging and difficult year with COVID and quite a lot of changes going on, particularly with regarding to consumer behavior, logistics, supply chains, and sales, such as e-commerce, which has taken off everywhere. The next slide, please. So Muslim spending on cosmetics globally is around $65 billion, and that's expected to grow to around actually $93 billion in 2025, and we have then $90 billion by 2023. Again, that is spending on all cosmetics, not just halal cosmetics. We don't really have any good figures actually on halal cosmetics sales anywhere in the world, really, in part because it's not noted down what types of cosmetics are always being sold. Is this halal product or isn't this? But it is a growing segment of those overall sales. But it still is not there yet vis-a-vis the mainstream. It's still somewhat quite niche. But the Middle East is a strong region for such sales because the majority of the population is Muslim, and there are 370 million people in the greater Middle East and North Africa region. So going from Morocco all the way to Turkey, and if we include Iran as well, and then the Gulf. But as you see, the Gulf is still not one of the big markets, in part because of the population size. But as I'll be discussing, the per capita spending is very high, and it's not a mass volume market like elsewhere. So it's the GCC is a very rich, wealthy area due to its oil wealth, and there are six members of the Gulf Cooperation Council of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, right, with a GDP of $3.4 trillion. And Saudi Arabia is the largest economy and the largest population with 35 million people, and the UAE comes second as the biggest population with 10 million, and also with GDP. And of those 10 million people, around 3.4 million are in Dubai, and Dubai is a key market in terms for the cosmetic sales. Halal cosmetics market is not yet that big in the GCC overall, not compared to Indonesia or Malaysia, while globally Asian, British, and American halal cosmetic brands are much better known. The UAE market it's a tough nut to crack, and a difficult market in the sense because it's a multi-demographic market, because you have a lot of foreigners working there, to the degree of 20% of the UAE's population, so just 2 million, are actually Emiratis or citizens. And then 69% of the overall population is male, and 31%, so 2.8 million, are women. So that's a very different market from most countries, which is usually 50-50 women, and rarely with that many foreigners. And the expats living there are varying on incomes. The majority are lower, not a core target market for the cosmetics, being a mass volume one. But Dubai is a very popular tourist destination. It was getting 1 million tourists a year prior to the COVID pandemics in 2019. And shopping is a big attraction for tourists to come because it's it used to have no tax, but now has a very low value added of just 5%. But if you compare that to what a tourist someone would be paying in Europe for some cosmetics or fragrances, it does make Dubai about 20% cheaper, which is why a lot of people go and buy products. And Dubai duty-free is a big major sales outlet, and particularly also for cosmetics and fragrances. And there's 2 big airports in Dubai, and lots of other big airports, and as you may know, it's one of the big world aviation hubs. So it's also a big travel destination, but also for people moving on, and so good sales. So when for physical on-the-ground beauty retailers in the UAE and Dubai, they have to appeal to tourists, but they also have to appeal to expatriate workers, and then also the Emirati population itself. And those tourists are really coming from all over the world. So you've got lots of different demands and lots of different things that people want from the cosmetics. You know, what appeals to someone in Eastern Europe might be different from the United States or Europe or Western Europe, but they'll want those products in Dubai or when they're visiting. Historically, the Gulf has been very much dominated by European and American cosmetics, fragrances and beauty products. And that's the same for the Middle East at large. Cosmetics has made a very big inroads, and they dominate a lot. There are local brands and there are local companies, but they're not very big and or as recognized. And consumers like foreign brands. It's also because of obviously the marketing budgets are a lot higher, but also people are very much looking for efficacy, how the cosmetic is applied and that it works. You have one Saudi Arabian brand that's been able to challenge foreign brands because it's adapted its cosmetics to the heat, for instance. You don't want certain cosmetics running or from sweat losing its efficiency. So they have worked on that for dealing with temperatures of up to 50 degrees Celsius. And also because it's very much an air-conditioned environment. If you're going from a 16-degree air conditioning world suddenly out into 40 degrees plus, you don't want the sort of sad panda effect with the cosmetics and things like that. But the Gulf Arabs, they're also consumers, also very cosmopolitan. They're aware of global trends, and there's a great emphasis placed on cosmetics and beauty among women. And we're also talking about a very wealthy population, certainly among the Gulf citizens. I mean, the Qataris are there up there next to the Swiss in terms of the highest GDP per capita in the world, and the Emiratis is also very high. Saudi Arabia, it plunges. It's about half of what it is in the Emirates, and that's a lot to do with them having a much bigger population. What's more uniquely Gulfy is Oriental perfumes. Now, these are often based on oud and frankincense. They're very strong perfumes, and they're not based on alcohol at all, unlike French perfumes. And so by definition, they are halal. But one trend we have seen with that in the last few years is that Oriental perfumers are putting halal logos on their products, even though they don't actually really need to. But these strong perfumes, they have a very long-lasting fragrance, and that's important in a hot and sweating climate, as the perfume remains on the skin rather than being removed. And it was a trend a few years ago. I just bring this up as in terms of where you have some intersection. Some of the big American and French brands started bringing out their own versions of oud and frankincense because they were very popular in the Gulf, and also because people were buying these perfumes in the Gulf and wanting something similar in Europe or the United States. Some of these ideas or adapting to the market could make good strategies for selling cosmetics or perfumes, beauty products for that market. As everywhere, this past year and a half, 2 years has been a big challenge because of COVID, and it's also led to quite a lot of changes in the consumer mindset. One thing that's really accelerated particularly is the growth of homegrown brands and local brands, which is taken off everywhere really, but also in the Gulf. And people seem to be much more interested in buying homegrown brands than in previous years. Dubai is the core launch market for any new products and for new brands within the Middle East. That's not just for the Gulf. It used to be Lebanon, and Beirut was the place for that, where brands went and launched. And the Lebanese, because the Lebanese very much seen as trendsetters and a sort of shopping window on the region and the world. But due to political issues and difficulties within Lebanon, that stopped, and Dubai very much secured that position for itself.
Okay.
And nearly all the big brands have a presence there. Because the way it used to really work was you'd have Gulf tourists come to Lebanon, and they would see the new trends and see what's going on, and the product launches were there, and then they would spread that message back in their home markets. Instead, that's gone from Dubai now spreading around, and as Dubai still has the money and the visibility, and at the moment you've got the Dubai World Expo happening, so it's the big that's the big launch market. It is not, however, a cheap market to set up in or have a presence. The overheads are very high. What we've seen in cosmetics in general, also with halal cosmetics, is that quite a few of new brands have been popping up the last year or two, and they're often celebrity driven. For instance, a Emirati Yemeni singer, she launched a new luxury makeup brand for Arab women. You had a Dubai-based celebrity makeup artist also launch his own brand, and a content creator, she also launched her own brand for the GCC market. But the GCC, it is a very competitive market. There's this big global brand presence, and they're all trying to fight for market share and on the shelves. But the good thing for the market there is that beauty stores are keeping on opening, while you had a lot, particularly in Europe and the United States, closed and really struggled the past year. Foreign brands are continuing to enter, and you had this past year a Brazilian cosmetics company. They got halal certification just to get into the Gulf market. So they're sort of seeing the potential there. And in terms of opening more physical retail outlets, you have Germany's Rituals. It's going to open up 100 stores in the Gulf within 5 years. Currently has 25, of which 13 are in the UAE. So that also shows the importance of the UAE as a market. Increase their number by 75% in the next few years. But the emphasis on why they're opening so many retail stores is, one, yes, you have this tourist market that's very big, but also e-commerce. It's growing, it's a burgeoning market, but it has not reached the sort of same penetration we've seen in Europe, the United States, and the Far East. In part, just that's partly also culturally. For instance, around 60% of e-commerce sales are still done cash in hand, so on delivery at the door, rather than through credit cards and debit cards. In part also because credit card penetration is not always so high unless you are a resident or have one from outside. Within the UAE market, there are halal cosmetics brands from all over the world. You'll find them from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from India and Korea, but they're not always available in mainstream retail outlets. You might have to sort of hunt around for it. But as you're saying in the introduction, I mean, the Korean exports are really growing, as they have throughout to all the Organization of Islamic Council countries. But with that, at 295 billion out of 7.5 billion, it's still a very good size, but there's a lot of potential for increasing that. And with the UAE growing last year by 62% and Saudi Arabia by 90%, these are huge double-digit growth figures, which clearly signals that there is demand and interest. They said the Gulf market has the highest per capita spending on cosmetics and fragrances in the whole Middle East. And in fact, it's among some of the highest per capita spending on cosmetics and fragrances in the world, particularly if we look at Gulf citizens. In fragrances, for instance, on an average, sort of globally, someone might have one, but the Emiratis or the Saudis will often have 3 or 4 or 5, and they'll often keep one in their car, one in their office, and 2 or 3 at home, because people like to spray themselves and smell good, and that's also related in part to the temperature and the heat as well. The K-beauty is growing in the Emirates, and like everywhere in the world, it's gaining traction and recognition, and that's also being driven by K-pop and also by Korean soap operas, which are widely viewed, and there's an increasing viewership. And not just in the Gulf. About 3 years ago in Beirut, there was a Korean band that came and played, and I was very surprised to see so many young Lebanese women fans and walking around and into it, because I'd not seen signs of that elsewhere, but suddenly on the streets all there. So that's is a good indication, because also the Middle East population, which is 90% Muslim, it's also a very young population, of which half are under 30 years old. So that's something to consider in terms of marketing and approach, and that it is a young population. Although that spending power is not so high, that would be more of mass volume than going for the medium and luxury end. And I want to say that there's not just the UAE and the Saudi market or the Gulf market to consider, but the Middle East market is in some ways a tale of 2 regions. You have this very wealthy Gulf area, and then you have the rest, which makes up a lot of the population, but does not have the same sort of purchasing power. But you have markets like Iraq, which now that there is relative stability and the conflict's over, it is a growing market. You have a lot of brands going to Iraq, and also to establish a brand presence and for that young population. But to enter Iraq, you go through the north, largely through the Kurdish area, which borders Turkey and Iran, and further afield there's Jordan and Lebanon. Syria is too difficult to market right now because of sanctions and the conflict. Egypt is a very large market with 100 million people, but less than 10% are high earners. The majority of the population is on a very low income level. So if you can sell there, it's a great mass market, but it's a very low returns. And Turkey is a further area market that really does tick all the boxes for halal cosmetics, with a sizable middle and upper income market, and again majority Muslims. And Turkish halal cosmetics are growing, and as are other brands. But as in the whole Middle East, there's quite a different approach or looking at halal, because halal in general. One of the problems is, of course, because Islam coming from the region, and halal also being an Arabic word that mean permissible, that there's a sort of idea that people think that everything is halal because it's in the region, it's in a country that's majority Muslim, everything must be halal. And this isn't true, particularly when you have ingredients and products coming from all over the world. And unlike in the past, it's not 2 or 3 ingredients in one thing, it's many ingredients. So that's when you need to make sure what's inside is halal. But it's in the Middle East in general, people just think, well, it all is. If the government allows it, it must be halal. Whereas in Europe and the United States, Muslims are in a minority, and they've had to do more to assert themselves in terms of they're in the market, but they're also looking and wanting these products. And there's often higher awareness around halal, ironically, in Muslim minority countries than there is within the Middle East itself. So this awareness needs to be addressed, and that that has to, in a lot of parts, come from the brands. So many of the halal cosmetics brands spend a lot of time on awareness and marketing, and pointing out that some of the ingredients are not halal, not permissible. One of the biggest one, of course, is lipstick, because a lot of gelatin comes from pork, which is not allowed. But slowly, that's an area where there's been quite a lot of growth in brands bringing out halal-certified lipsticks, or that do not contain pork gelatin. And if they contain beef, that also should be halal-certified. All right, I'll swing back now to the UAE and the rest of the region. The UAE is not just important as an actual retail and sales outlet itself and connecting to customers. It's also very important as a logistics hub. The Jebel Ali port in Dubai handles, it's around the third largest re-export hub in the world. Okay. So you have a lot of products going in there, and then they're sent around. That's also a lot of businesses are based there. And so that those of you establish a presence there for re-export Dubai and then spread around. Dubai is also a very important as a hub for the African market, which Korean cosmetics companies should also consider. I mean, interestingly, there are actually 21,000 African companies in Dubai, and the trade has increased tremendously. And interesting, I mean, there are 45 Middle East and Africa regional headquarters are in Dubai, whereas there are only actually 23 within Africa itself. So there are far more headquarters for Africa in Dubai than in Africa itself. And they're there because there are great transport networks. But so companies coming to enter the Middle East Africa market, they'll be based in Dubai, expand in the Middle East, and then they'll go over to the African market. And Africa is 1.3 billion people, of which 40% roughly are Muslims. So that's 530 million consumers, and that's in many, many different countries. But again, purchasing power is often low, but there is a market there for more costly cosmetics. Saudi Arabia is key, and if you look at the Middle East luxury cosmetics, they're valued at around $14 billion. Saudi Arabia accounts for about half of that figure. So most companies will start in Dubai, have their main headquarters or presence, and then will focus on the Saudi market and go in and out. And the reason for such high figures is the Saudis, they spend a lot on cosmetics and fragrances. The spending is estimated around $650 per person every 3 months. Wow. But that goes even higher in places like in Kuwait. They can spend up to $800. Okay. So substantially more. This is also because they have the income, but also there is quite a tradition of giving gifts of fragrances, cosmetics as well. Okay. The most important sort of item in that shopping basket is actually fragrances, around 40%. Makeup is around 35%, and skincare is the remaining 20-25%. Over the past year, as in other markets around the world, because of wearing masks and things, lipstick has struggled, and skincare has really increased a lot. And a lot of the brands have pivoted and tried to shift on the skincare aspect, because it being under the mask and then doing things like talk over Zoom. Right. The malls are very important as outlets in Dubai, in the UAE. These are the main shopping places that people go. Oh, okay. But also, unlike other places, supermarkets are actually a very important outlet for cosmetics and fragrances, even for expensive ones and higher end. And pharmacies as well are big outlets. As I mentioned earlier, with the e-commerce is really increased and taken off a lot, and the pandemic really accelerated that trend and made consumers much more comfortable. But it's only around 10% of the market overall of cosmetic sales that are by e-commerce. That has increased. 2016 was about 1%, so it's quite a jump. But showing still that it's there, as I said earlier, 60% is cash. And the Middle East is still a big cash-based society. Although, yeah, COVID has changed that a little bit. E-commerce is a very good way, particularly for smaller and independent brands, new brands, to get a presence. At a global level, just 4 or 5 companies dominate physical beauty sales. They have about 80% global market share. But on e-commerce, they just have about 16 to 20% share. So there's a lot more potential there for small brands to get through and reach consumers. And brands are doing this as they're doing it in Indonesia, Malaysia, and elsewhere. It's through influencers on social media. Brands they're usually using Arab pop stars or film stars to do that. They're also doing a lot of outreach in social media, having call centers, directly connecting with consumers over Instagram, TikTok, and other social media platforms. There aren't any particular Middle East or Gulf social media platforms that sort of need to be considered. They're generally the same that are being used in Europe, the United States, and elsewhere. So that's very much Instagram for the younger crowd, and TikTok, and then Facebook. In the UAE 2 years ago, so the Amazon entered the market in e-commerce just within the UAE, and we're probably going to see the spread around the rest of the Gulf of these bigger e-commerce sales platforms. And there are some like Boutiquat, which is out of Kuwait, that sells cosmetics in the whole GCC region. And you have other smaller platforms as well. I'd like to mention some of the challenges. As I said, some of the challenges is the awareness, but it's also labels. There are so many labels and logos on the side of products now, from vegan to cruelty-free, to then you have obviously the halal label. Unfortunately, there have been no surveys or studies done on this in the Gulf or the Middle East, but there was one done a few years ago in Europe, and halal cosmetics was less understood than sustainable, vegan, or natural. And 40% of consumers got that in Britain and France, and in Germany and Italy it was less than 20%. It would be very interesting to know so what's the sort of understanding there is in the Middle East, and whether this really is a huge sales advantage. But in general, halal cosmetics are trying to put on as many sort of logos as they can to cover everything, because one of the big competition aspects and challenges for halal cosmetics is that there are a lot of other cosmetics. So there's this challenge of natural and organic cosmetics, which, although that is to the advantage of Korean cosmetics producers, as they can emphasize the natural. But also within the Gulf, you also have growing demand for Ayurvedic products from India.
Ayurvedic, yeah.
Yes. And they're sort of considered also natural products, and contain no animal products at all. You have a big Indian Ayurvedic brand, Vedics. They're going to be launching on Amazon in the Gulf later this year, supposedly. So that's also sort of a sign of the growing demand, and you do see the Ayurvedic products very widely available there. We've yet to see a sort of merger of the two, but that could come. There's some sort of suggestions for Korean cosmetics producers. As I was saying, the UAE should be a sort of base, and it's a good place to start, and then spread from there around the Gulf.
Okay.
But that very much depending also on which level you're going for. If you're very high end, then the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi in the capitals is very much the place to focus. Mm-hmm. But you also have a big medium segment there as well. Get halal certified, but also emphasize being animal-free, vegan, natural. But the halal certification provides additional trust for consumers and the traceability. Jakim, Malaysia's Jakim and Indonesia's Mui, they're widely recognized in the Gulf. But the UAE also has its but the UAE also has its own certification body, ESMA.
ESMA, okay.
Although the ESMA standards on cosmetics, they've not done as much sort of progress on that as Jakim has. With the 2012 standard, they're much more, the standards are considered higher and more encompassing. There's the potential to look for tie-ups with GCC brands. And also there are a lot of new brands that are looking for private labels and OEM. One challenge, particularly that some of the GCC brands have had and halal cosmetics brands have had, is getting high quality ingredients. They found that the ingredients from Indonesia are not good enough, and from a lot of other places, which is why they're primarily sourcing from Europe. So there is this potential to, if they can get high quality ingredients, they could source them from Korea or through private labels, OEMs, and doing the same sort of tie-ups that a lot of Korean companies have done with in Indonesia or Malaysia. Mm-hmm. There is a space there for men as well. I mean, it's only this year that Wardah, the big halal cosmetics company in Indonesia, brought out its own male line of halal cosmetics, and I think that's one of the first worldwide. Okay. And in the Middle East, like elsewhere, men are increasingly getting interested in male grooming and things like that. And beyond what has just generally been halal beard oil and things like that. So it obviously can extend to the
halal beard oil.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. About the halal cosmetic certification. What is your forecast, or what is your estimation about the halal certified cosmetics? In Korea, we actually we export a lot of big quantity of cosmetics to Saudi Arabia and UAE, but still most of Korean cosmetics are not halal certified. Also, our main market is Indonesia and Malaysia, right? In Korean cosmetics. But still, most of the Korean cosmetics are not halal certified. Yeah, but in the future, I mean, because the Indonesia, for example, now they have the regulation, halal certification, a mandatory halal certification regulation, right? So like this, in the future, halal certification is very important to enter the Islamic market. So what is the situation in the Middle East? Is it the same importance with the Southeast Asian countries? So what is your opinion about the future of halal certification of cosmetics?
I think it'll get there. The Middle East is very much focused on making sure food's halal certified. I mean, across the whole halal sector, I mean, we lack a universal standard on any of them: food, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, etc. Which is a big stumbling block. I think there needs to be far more unity and recognition between certification bodies. I think Indonesia is really going to be key, and this is going to drive, I think, a lot of halal certification because of this mandatory law. And there's such a huge market. I mean, it's what 250 million more. I think it's 270 million now. And so I think for a lot of companies, if they're going to, you know, like Korean one, you're getting halal certified to get into the Indonesian market. You don't want to sort of miss out on that. But the UAE and Saudi, they are each year they're tightening up their halal certification. They've been a lot more aggressive in a way this past year or two on halal food and wanting certification, and that is going to extend into other areas. And I think other countries are going to follow Indonesia's route there on mandatory. I mean, it's going to be a very interesting sort of case study in many ways. You know, I mean, they've had a lot of problems implementing this, and how long do you give people time to certify, and can we even get things certified? I mean, particularly for halal pharmaceuticals, it's very tricky. Halal cosmetics is a lot more straightforward. The fact that you're also getting more mainstream European brands and American brands getting halal certified, that is going to push things, I think, as well. But you know, you do have like some of the big multinationals that are halal certified for the Muslim majority markets, and then they won't do that for other markets, yet it's the same product. They're just not doing that over not wanting to put the halal label on and say the European market or something like this. But they'll do that obviously for the Gulf market. I mean, if we compare it with halal food, you've had a lot of American and British and European companies get halal certified to export and get into the Gulf market. You've also had a lot of quite big ingredients players and people like Britain's Cousins, which make many big global brands, deliberately got everything halal certified for export, primarily to the Middle Eastern market. So it's sort of I think it's a wave that's suddenly going to get bigger and sort of crash, and those that get in earlier will have an advantage. I mean, it's the same with very few halal cosmetics brands are particularly focused on the sort of eco-conscious or sustainability aspect yet. But they should be doing that now as well to get ahead of the curve, because brands, you know, products that are not doing that in 3-4 years time, consumers are going to want this, and better to do it from the start than try and do it sort of later. And the same with the halal certification. But then, as I said, also in the UAE, I mean, particularly, I mean, it's such the strange demographics of the place and the number of tourists. But there is I think there is a resurgency and more and more understanding of halal, and that's going to trickle down more into cosmetics.
So maybe a multi-leveling strategy is better, to penetrate the market, right? Not just only the halal, maybe other ethical claim together, we can go into the market.
Yes, and then also, I mean, the Korean brands can also play on the Korean popularity of K-pop and everything, but then maybe merge that with, I don't know, you have a Korean singer and then you bring along an Arab singer and they do something together or something like that. That could have good waves or effects. Yes,
like you said, the celebrity marketing, so it can be a good strategy into the market. Okay, so let me summarize the seminar first in Korean. Okay. 지금까지 그 다이너 스탠다드의 우리 폴 코크레인 연구원을 모시고 중동 지역의 그 화장품 시장에 대한 다양한 이슈들을 저희가 살펴봤습니다. 소중한 시간이었다고 생각하고요. 아마도 지금까지 한국에서 이 중동 그 화장품 시장에 대해서 이 정도로 좀 집중적으로 어떤 그 화장품 시장의 여러 가지 양상에 대해서 다뤘던 적은 없는 것으로 제가 생각을 하고 있습니다. 그러면서 오늘 폴 코크레인 그 연구원을 모시고 이런 기회를 갖게 된 거 상당히 좋았다 이렇게 생각을 하고요. 정말 오늘 그 여러 가지 그러니까 뭐 그 시장뿐만 아니라 또 그 지역에 진출하기 위한 여러 가지 전략들, 그리고 이제 그 다양한 시장의 어떤 다양성들, 그죠? 뭐 워낙 그 많은 분야가 오늘 얘기가 나왔고, 그다음 심지어는 유통 채널에 대한 어떤 그 접근법이라든지 또는 그 마케팅 방식이라든지 이런 얘기 전부 나왔기 때문에 상당히 오늘 그 좋은 기회였다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 오늘 이런 그 아주 훌륭한 발표를 해주신 우리 그 폴 코크레인 연구원께 진심으로 감사를 드리고 오늘 그 뭐 아쉽지만은 이 웨비나를 마치도록 하겠습니다. Paul Cochrane, Mr. Cochrane, actually now is the time to finish. Okay, thank you very much for your taking your valuable time for this webinar. And then I think today's the conversation with you is really valuable for Korean cosmetic industry. I wish you and your family good health and happiness always.
Thanks very much. It was a pleasure.
And I hope to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, soon. Yeah.
You too.
If we have another chance after COVID-19, okay, we have new days.
Yes, let's hope so. Yeah.
Okay. So take care. Thank you very much.
You as well. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Bye
bye.
Thank you, Dr. No. Bye bye.
Good.